Tonight on PBS News Weekend, 5 years after the murder of George Floyd, his family tells us their fight for racial justice and police reform goes on. Then tensions in the South China Sea mount as Chinese Coast Guard ships clash with Philippine vessels in disputed waters. And 50 years after the blockbuster movie Jaws, an endurance swimmer navigates the waters around the island where it was filmed to change perceptions about sharks.
For the past 50 years, it's all been about fear and about the danger of sharks. I want to try to change the narrative for a new generation and say, sharks actually bring life, they sustain life, they make oceans healthy.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. It was 5 years ago today that George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police. Cell phone video of the event, captured by a young witness, sent shockwaves around the world and triggered an American reckoning with racial justice and police use of force. Today, vigils were held in cities across America to mark the day. In Minneapolis, at the intersection where Floyd died, crowds placed flowers on his memorial. But despite the protests and the focus on race and racial inequality that followed Floyd's death, a recent Pew Research poll found that 72% of Americans surveyed said it did not lead to changes that improved Black people's lives. Earlier, I spoke with Selwyn Jones, who's George Floyd's uncle. He's co-founder of the Justice 929 Foundation, a nonprofit that promotes civil rights and systemic change. Our conversation is part of our ongoing series, Race Matters. I imagine this time of year has got to be difficult for you and your family. What are you thinking about? What do you think about when this anniversary comes rolling around?
The impact that it made upon the world. COVID came, COVID had everybody where we needed to have them. That's indoors, looking at television, needing to be informed. And boy, didn't they get informed about a lot of things. They got informed about racism, hatred, police brutality, systemic racism, power control. That all came out that day.
You know, afterward, there was a sort of a flurry of changes. Police departments were banning chokeholds. They were requiring body cams, requiring training on de-escalating confrontations. And yet killings by police officers have gone up since then. What do you make of that?
I think the mental health that goes along with being a police officer has to be stressful. So we need more patience. You know, obviously, we need more mental health evaluations. But we literally need something to flip the script, because you're right. There's been more people deceased 5 years after than 5 years before George. But all I know is this, is we have to continue this fight, this push.
You know, just a few days ago, the Justice Department said that they were going to stop monitoring the Minneapolis Police Department and other departments around the country that have been accused of violating civil rights. What's your reaction to that?
For them to say that they're going to deactivate their efforts is par for the course. We've been fighting systemic racism, police brutality for a plethora of years, and the fight is real. It still continues. And why anyone of power would make that decision? Because what good comes from exonerating killers?
Talk about the work you've done in the years since then to try to make good, to try to do good. I know you've got a foundation. Tell me about your efforts.
I've got a foundation that we created, Justice 929, and we want to work on homelessness. We want to work on mental health issues. We want to work on domestic violence, police brutality, obviously, social justice, wrongfully convicted. There will not be enough change to me until all of the killings, all of the ignorance, and all of the unrest is settled. And wow, that's a whole lot to offer.
It is a whole lot to offer and a lot to work on. What do you hope is your nephew's legacy? What do you want his legacy to be?
I don't know if it's a legacy, but what I know is that death that was caused by Derek Chauvin on May the 25th of 2020 has changed the dynamics of how the world has been ran since that day. And it's changed policing. So let's hopefully we can keep momentum, keep pushing, keep fighting, and you will continuously hear his name from me.
Selwyn Jones, thank you very much.
Thank you, my man.
In tonight's other news, Poland scrambled its air defenses as Russia conducted an aerial assault on neighboring Ukraine. Poland, a NATO member, said it took the necessary precautions to keep its airspace safe. It happened as Russia bombarded Ukraine with hundreds of drones and missiles. At least 12 people were killed across the country, including 3 children. The U.S. envoy to Ukraine says the attack on Kyiv violates the Geneva peace protocols for protecting civilians. Hours later, and even as battles continued, Russia and Ukraine traded more than 300 prisoners. It was the third exchange of the weekend. Altogether, a total of 1,000 soldiers and civilians returned to their home countries. In Gaza, Israel's aerial assault continues. Health officials said at least 23 people were killed today across the Gaza Strip, including Khan Yunis to the south and Jabalia in the north. Israel says it seeks to destroy Hamas and tries to avoid civilian areas. But at a rally calling for a ceasefire last night, former hostage Naama Levy said that while she was in captivity, she feared Israeli airstrikes.
What frightened me most were the bombings. First you hear the whistling, praying it won't fall on us. Then the explosions. Sounds so intense they paralyze your body, and the earth shaking. Each time I was certain it was my end. In one bombing, part of the house I was in collapsed. Fortunately, the wall I was leaning against didn't crumble, and that's what saved my life.
As Israel's military operation continues, so does the humanitarian crisis. Desperate Palestinians raided an aid truck that crossed into Gaza City today. Dozens of people jumped onto the truck and tried to grab boxes of food. The UN World Food Program estimates that more than 2 million people are facing extreme levels of hunger. Billionaire Elon Musk may be easing out of his role, heading up efforts to slash government spending for President Trump. In a post today on X, the social media platform he owns, Musk wrote that he's back to spending 24/7 at work, sleeping in conference rooms. He said he needs to be super focused on X and carmaker Tesla. In February, the president designated Musk a special government employee. And on this Memorial Day weekend, preparations are underway to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice for this country. Members of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard, have been gathering at Arlington National Cemetery to greet visiting Gold Star families. One by one, soldiers placed flags at the base of each of the 260,000 headstones. It's a tradition that dates back to 1948. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, tensions rise as Chinese and Philippine vessels clash in the South China Sea. And an endurance swimmer tries to change perceptions about sharks in the waters off Martha's Vineyard, where the movie Jaws was shot.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
The EPA has reportedly drafted a plan to eliminate all limits on greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. That's according to documents recently obtained by the New York Times. The power industry is one of the top sources of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, which scientists have said for decades help drive climate change. Now, with the rise of AI technology, demand on power plants is increasing, in large part to AI's reliance on data centers. Ali Rogan spoke with Kenza Bryan, climate reporter for the Financial Times.
Thanks for joining us. How would you describe the environmental impact of these data centers that are at the heart of AI?
Their environmental impact is huge and it's growing. AI data centers are massively contributing to the continued rise in power demand, which itself contributes to the continued rise in global emissions. And most importantly, it's growing faster than grid capacities. And even more importantly, it's growing faster than renewable energy growth, which means that even as data center energy use grows, clean energy from wind, solar, nuclear perhaps, is lagging behind.
And what have you learned about the public health implications of the capacity that's needed to power these AI systems?
Some of the public health implications are very local, but really the effects are more global than local. So pushing up demand for fossil fuels means more CO2 is emitted, which helps global temperatures creep up, which can have local effects through extreme weather events, for example.
What sort of regulatory environment is there for these facilities?
For the moment, there's very little regulatory scrutiny of data center energy use. And one of the only governments in the world that has started to take this seriously is Ireland and its own energy regulators, because they realize that some of the big tech companies that operate in Ireland, including some of the big US ones like Amazon, are starting to put immense constraints on its grid, which means it's difficult for local industry, for local houses to get the power they need. So they have proposed that when a new data center is built, it brings as much additional capacity to the grid as it takes away. But until those grid capacity constraints start to be felt more concretely in the US, for example, I think it's unlikely we're going to see specific regulations saying data centers have to bring more energy to the grid or have to bring more clean energy to the grid, particularly given that Trump wants to make the US an AI superpower. It wouldn't make sense at the moment to constrain that growth.
And in the midst of that growth, these companies that have these AI products and services, they are acknowledging the environmental impact, it seems, and they're talking about what they're doing. What are they telling you about the steps that they're taking to mitigate all of the impacts they're having?
Companies like Amazon, Meta, Alphabet, Google's parent company, they all claim accurately to be some of the world's largest buyers of clean energy now. So they make huge investments in wind, solar power, increasingly nuclear energy. The problem with that is those investments aren't always very local. So they might be investing in solar energy in Texas while they're consuming that energy somewhere else in a different US state. And critics of these big tech companies would say their promises don't always match up with the problems that local grids face and local people face.
And what have you learned about the debate over the merits of increasing use of AI in everyday life against the drawbacks that we've just discussed in terms of the impact on the environment and public health?
The AI boom has taken off at an awkward time for the fight against climate change because global temperatures are already rising much faster than scientists expected. And now AI, the International Energy Agency has said, is contributing to a massive increase in power demand, which itself is contributing to an increase in emissions. Because the problem is, we haven't decarbonized our grids yet. They're still hugely reliant on fossil fuels. They need energy even when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, which means they're even more reliant on fossil fuels and those stable sources of energy like a gas power plant than other sources of energy demand.
Kenza Bryan with the Financial Times, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Nearly a quarter of the world's maritime trade goes through the South China Sea, which sits between China and a number of Asian nations, including Vietnam, the Philippines, and Taiwan. In addition, experts say it has large reserves of oil and gas. In recent years, it's also been the site of clashes between Chinese Coast Guard ships and Philippine vessels as Beijing tries to exert its claim to virtually the entire sea in defiance of international law. A confrontation this past week on the disputed South China Sea.
Your unsafe maneuvers are in clear violation of your obligations for safe conduct.
A Chinese Coast Guard ship sideswiped a Filipino government fishing vessel and fired its water cannons. Philippine officials said its vessel was on a routine research mission, collecting sand. But 3 small uninhabited sandbars in the area are the reasons for heightened tensions. Both China and the Philippines claim sovereignty over them. What's at stake is less about the sandbars themselves than about the body of water surrounding them, the South China Sea. Since 1952, Beijing has claimed virtually the entire sea, everything inside what's referred to as the 9-dash line. In 2023, China added a 10th dash off Taiwan. The Philippines, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Vietnam all reject China's claims. That was the backdrop earlier this month for the annual joint U.S.-Philippines military exercises known as Balikatan, Tagalog for shoulder to shoulder. 9,000 U.S. troops joined 5,000 Filipino military personnel for live fire drills.
This type of training is absolutely invaluable to us. To be able to get out here to operate with our treaty ally and to be able to set up a defense like this and integrate all of our systems is just remarkable, and we're really grateful for the opportunity.
Some of the drills could have been sending Beijing a message. For instance, the Philippine province of Zambales along the South China Sea coast was the site of an exercise using a U.S. missile defense system to target drones acting as hostile aircraft. A 1951 mutual defense treaty between the United States and the Philippines commits each nation to defend the other in case of attack. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said the U.S. commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. Andrew Chubb is a fellow at the Asia Society and a senior lecturer at Lancaster University in England. Mr. Chubb, help us put what we just saw in context. That clash we saw between the Chinese Coast Guard ship and the Philippine vessel, that didn't just start this year.
Yeah, that's right, John. Those particular reefs and sandbars that were referred to in the report have been the subject of sporadic incidents over the last 6 or 7 years, but there's been a noticeable uptick in the activities and the confrontations this year. In particular, we saw last month China really going public with a sovereignty assertion, with the unfurling of a flag and sort of high-profile news reports laying claim to this particular sandbar, Sandy Key. And the significance of that is that it lies just a couple of miles from the Philippines' main military outpost in the area, which it's been doing some pretty significant upgrades at over the last few years. It's also very near to China, as one of China's major artificially built island outposts. So it's a sort of scene where there's a likelihood of further confrontations if this trend continues.
And why is the South China Sea so important to China?
Well, I think from China's perspective, the dispute is multi-layered. It started as a dispute about islands, particularly the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands, but also Scarborough Shoal, which has been a particular flashpoint between the Philippines and China over the last decade or so, through the 70s through to the 90s. You had the initiation of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and it's coming into effect in 1994. And that set some very clear rules about, they were actually referred to by the Filipino captain just now in the clip, some very clear rules about what you can and can't do in which waters, with some very specific, numbers put on the kind of distance that you can claim off of a particular type of feature, et cetera, et cetera. And China was there at the inception for that particular convention, which the US has never signed, but which now China is kind of flagrantly struggling against those rules. That was really demonstrated, came to a head in 2016 arbitration that the Philippines brought. And then layered on top of all of that, you've got now the US-China geostrategic competition playing out also in the South China Sea and other maritime littoral areas in East Asia, such as the East China Sea.
A lot of Americans, when they think about this region, they think about China's designs on Taiwan. But could the South China Sea be just as volatile or even more volatile than that?
The short answer is yes, it could. The big difference with the South China Sea and Taiwan is the number of players in the area. So you've got the Philippines, Vietnam, you've also got Malaysia, Brunei makes a claim there, Taiwan occupies the biggest naturally formed island. So you've got many different players operating in the area, and that's before you bring in the sort of extra-regional powers such as the United States. Also, the UK has been there recently, Australia, Japan, South Korea has done some patrols there, and other European navies as well have been talking about, if not actually, stepping up to fill some of the strategic gap.
Andrew Chubb, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Sharks have been cast as the ultimate villain ever since the movie Jaws. It was released 50 years ago this summer, telling the story of a man-eating great white shark terrorizing beachgoers. But the reality is that humans are a bigger threat to sharks than the other way around. An endurance swimmer wants to get that message out by swimming around Martha's Vineyard, which is where Jaws was filmed. Here again, Ali Rogan.
Endurance swimmer Lewis Pugh is swimming 60 miles around Martha's Vineyard.
I swim for as far as I can each day. We then mark the position on the map. I go and sleep, and then I get back in the next day at exactly the same spot and carry on.
In just a Speedo and swim cap, Pugh faces wind, rough waters, and most unpredictable of all, sharks in the depths below. But the sharks are the point.
For the past 50 years, it's all been about fear and about the danger of sharks. What I want to do is I want to try to change the narrative for a new generation and say, sharks actually bring life, they sustain life, they make oceans healthy.
And he says there's no better backdrop for this message than the place where the Jaws effect was born.
They portrayed sharks in a way that they are villains, they're out to get humans, and we know that they are nothing of the sort. And so this is an opportunity to try and tell a new narrative for a new generation.
Globally, on average, 274,000 sharks are killed every day. That's 100 million sharks a year.
It's an ecocide which is taking place right now. It's completely unsustainable. It's absolute madness. And it's going to lead to a watery deserts.
The greatest threat is from overfishing, but it's exacerbated by stigma.
Sharks are absolutely amazing animals. I mean, they've been around since before the dinosaur. I mean, think about that. They've survived 5 mass extinctions, and yet they are really under threat right now in our generation. We're the only generation that can now save the shark from extinction.
This swim is meant to celebrate sharks, but Pugh is still encroaching on their house. He's accompanied by a kayaker whose vessel has a shark shield, an electromagnetic device that deters sharks without harming them.
So I'm talking sharks, sharks, sharks. I then now got to get into the water and start doing the swim. Well, you can imagine what I'm thinking about, right? And so everything, every little shadow which you see, perhaps it's a rock underwater, everything sort of kind of looks like a shark. And so it's so important that I just keep my mind calm and just say, Lewis, just keep calm, carry on. It's very, very easy for the mind to get carried away in the waters of Cape Cod.
Pugh is no stranger to tough conditions. He represents the United Nations as patron of the oceans and was the first person to complete a long-distance swim in every ocean of the world. He crossed the North Pole, dove into the icy water in Antarctica, swam the length of the Hudson River, and through the coral reefs and shipping corridors of the Red Sea, all to raise awareness about threats to our oceans. But this swim, he says, is one of the most challenging of his career. It's long, it's cold, and it's mentally grueling. The morning we spoke to him, he managed to get in 2 of his planned 10 kilometers for the day in a brutal pre-dawn swim.
So there I find myself lowering myself slowly into this dark, dark black water. And the cold, it just gnaws its way into you day after day after day. It's a type of cold which demands an answer. Why are you in here?
On this swim, he's in here for the sharks. For PBS News Weekend, I'm Allie Rogan.
And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. I hope you'll have a meaningful Memorial Day.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.